It's my pleasure to introduce Matthew McCarthy.
Do I cry now or do I cry later? How's everybody feeling? That's okay. How's everybody feeling? All right, we're going in the right direction. So I had just started Ben & Jerry's about 5 years ago, and we were getting ready to launch some new flavors. That's one of the most exciting parts of the year. We're getting ready to launch these flavors. We've got a whole communication plan in place. And my job as kind of the CEO stiff is like, all right, we're going to put Matthew out and do some PR stuff, right? And usually business press. Like, I'll do consumer press, but I'm just not that interesting, honestly. The people who develop our flavors or our partners, that's where the fun, that's where the energy is. So I'm talking to my PR guy, Sean Greenwood, and he's like, all right, I got a great gig for you. We're going to go on Fox Business. I was like, oh yeah, okay, sounds great. And he goes, and by the way, it's live TV. And so I'm like, oh yeah, it sounds great. So basically we pack up all the ice cream, we go down to Manhattan. We're there in the studios right in Midtown, right? And how many people here have been on live TV? Yeah, it's terrifying. So, and I like to talk. I got kind of a big mouth. I'm very, get energy from other people. I'm really extroverted, but I was still freaking out. And it's one thing to do an interview with press where it's recorded or it's it's in the paper, or it's on social media. It's like, no problem. Don't worry, Matthew. We won't say those stupid things that you just said. So we get in there, and they say, would you like to go to makeup, Mr. McCarthy? I'm like, what? So we get all ready. I get mic'd up, and they take me around to the stage. Again, we're right in Midtown. It's the Stuart Varney show. Some of you may be familiar with it. Stuart Varney is this kind of really viper of a guy, really all over business leaders. And I was like, this is gonna go great. And we got the ice cream out. We're serving ice cream to people in the back, and everybody's eating the ice cream. It's great. And everybody's got smiles on, which is great. We're kind of in the joy business at Ben & Jerry's. And they take me around, like, all right, your segment's coming up. Well, first they put you in the green room, and I'm in the green room like, this isn't helping, because you're watching the video of like who's going before you. I'm like, you're just getting more and more scared about having to be on national television on a business program. And so they take you into the sound stage, and Stuart Varney's there, there's cameras all over the place, and I'm standing on the side. He's like, all right, well, he's getting ready for the next segment. Blah, 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 let's talk about the price of oil, and the NASDAQ, and the Ramalama-Ding-Dong, whatever else you're talking about. And plus, next up, I've got the CEO of Ben & Jerry's who's going to be here with us to talk about his company. Okay, and commercial break. And they kind of get you up there, and you go sit in the thing. And Stuart Varney's just going through his paper. I got like a cup of ice cream. I'm like ready to go, talk about the ice cream. And I like to eat ice cream when I'm doing interviews, by the way. It kind of puts things at ease. And I highly recommend it, whatever it puts you at ease. And so Stuart Varney looks to me. I say, hi, Stuart. It's nice to meet you. He goes, okay, so we'll talk about your new flavor and maybe about business. So I said, okay, that sounds great. And then there's this guy standing over there. He's like this. And I'm like, oh, man. And so literally he's, all right, action. All right, I'm joined by Matthew McCarthy, the CEO of Ben & Jerry's. And he turns to me and says, Matthew McCarthy, why are you a socialist? And I'm sitting there like I got a spoon in hand. I'm like, are you shitting me? And I didn't know what to say. I froze. Well, we got this new flavor, terrible. And he's like, yeah, but you support Bernie Sanders. And I was like, I'm trying desperately to bridge. They teach in PR bridging tactics. When someone asks you a question here, you're like, can we get back to the ice cream? And when he said the Bernie thing, that actually kind of made me angry, because I was like, we don't support politicians at Ben & Jerry's. We support policies, we support change, we support fighting the systemic issues that cause marginalization. But we don't go politicking for politicians, especially when they're elections and stuff like that. We don't do that. And so I said, no, we don't support Bernie's. I didn't know what to say. I hadn't been prepared for this. And I'm sure my poor Sean, my PR guy's on the side, oh man, feeling like, yeah. So at any rate, we kind of struggle through I struggle through the interview, and we talk about stuff, and they're rolling B-roll kind of in the background. So there's pictures of ice cream being made and happy people and whatnot. And so I get through the interview, and it wasn't terrible, I don't think, but you could probably find it online and have a good laugh. But we get to the end, and he's like, all right, and coming up next, we're going to talk about the NASDAQ and oil prices and some other Ramalama-Ding-Dong. And they go, okay, now we're to commercial break. And so I I'm sitting there like, well, God, I'm glad that's over. And so I said to Stuart, I said, have you ever actually had Ben & Jerry's ice cream? And he said, this is hilarious. He said, no, I won't eat Ben & Jerry's ice cream. I came from Europe. I came from a country where socialism was the problem, and I escaped it. And I looked him dead in the face. It's the only kind of maybe thing that I did that had a little bit of chutzpah. I looked him right in the face. I said, Stuart, I'm a capitalist. I've been in business for 30 years. We're an extremely successful, profitable company. And by the way, it's owned by Unilever, which is a 60 billion euro major consumer packaged goods company. Sir, I'm a business person. And he didn't know what to say because he had this whole narrative in his head about, I don't know, business or long-haired hippies with beards or whatnot. I think I didn't tell him I drove a Subaru. I mean, that would have been the end of that, right? And I tell this because I had just in my first couple months on the job, just basically decided we were going to grow Ben & Jerry's faster than it had ever been grown. And we also were going to take positions on things to drive the social mission further. Now, I didn't know how to do either of those things. I always like to say, like, I got 30 years of business experience, so I think I'm halfway decent at running companies. But on all those other issues, on climate justice, social justice, and all the detailed things that I had some exposure to in my prior roles. And I'd been moving in this direction, but not really as deep as what was required at Ben & Jerry's. And so Stuart Varney, maybe I'll send him a thank you note one day. He helped me with two key things that I needed to, kind of was like a big slap in the face or like brick to the forehead type of moment. And it taught me, really highlighted for me two things. One is that I'm going to have to really fight a lot for the stuff that we're doing at Ben & Jerry's, particularly if we want to do more of them. And the second thing was, man, I'm going to have to attack these tropes about this or that. And that's come up consistently in all the talks since last night to today. This idea of dual narratives, things that have tensions. Gary talked about the tensions. We talked about the head and the heart. We talked about these things where there's kind of duality, but specifically as it relates to a business doing good things versus just doing less bad things or actually not giving a shit at all. That's one of the biggest tropes that I've set about trying to smash. This idea of, actually, I think the concept of the balance is inappropriate. A balance, when someone says to me, how do you balance? I get this question all the time, how do you balance growing your business, winning in the marketplace, driving the financial results that are required? And how do you balance that with, all those positions you guys take? And it's like the oldest question. I just stop people right there. I said, listen, a balance is fundamentally zero sum. When one side goes down, the other one goes up. And when the other side goes down, the other one goes up. That's bullshit. I want more growth, and I want to have more impact. That's it. I'm not saying it's easy. Let's not confuse simple and easy. A lot of simple things, and business people are really good at making things super complicated. It's not rocket science. I'm not saying it's easy, but it is pretty simple. And I reject the balance trope. How many people want to have less sales, but they did good things? How many people are like, yeah, I want to grow my sales, and I'm okay with, doing the wrong thing that's against my values, right? If you just think about it, it doesn't make any sense. So I want and, not either or. And in fact, Ben & Jerry's is one of many great examples of companies that have created financial success, created economic growth and empowerment, employment, big profits, and a lot of great ice cream, not in spite of the positions, but because of them. And a lot of people the past few days have asked me a question that I do get a lot, particularly early stage companies where it's like, holy smokes, we don't have any money to pay the people the way that we want to pay them right now. Or our suppliers are just freaking all over us about this, that, or the other thing, and now this supply chain's taking longer, and my bills are going to be this. How much of the social mission stuff can I do? I don't have a ready answer for that. I get asked that a real lot. How do you balance it? What I'd say is, you are what you do, right? In this world of hyper-transparency that we have now, when things started getting really, really transparent, particularly digital media, digital communications, the internet, and all related things really started to take off, transparency has really changed what public relations can be all about. In the past, senior executives could basically like, oh man, this is not a good issue we got going on here. Let's have a story on that, right? Or let's have some talking points on that. And hypertransparency has actually been phenomenal because it really has taken away the say and demotivated the say and in a huge way elevated the do. So you are what you do. And if you choose to park the stuff that you think is important to your values, the stuff you know is important to you, and you park it, you're going to own that consequence. I'm not saying that to like shame anybody or whatnot. It's actually kind of a simple equation for me, particularly in the early stage of a company. What you do and the early folks who choose to buy your product, your service, partner with you, whoever they might be, they're doing that because of you, because of the things you're doing. And actually, it gets sometimes harder as you scale. I think some early stage businesses think, well, when I am scaled, I'll have more money and a little bit more freedom to do these things. I'm here to tell you that that's not really the way it works. When things get bigger, you're still going to have bigger ambitions, and the price tag may be bigger, but percentage-wise, it doesn't. So the beautiful thing about being in a world where you are what you do is that the people who are still living in the I am what I say, a lot of them are just dead and they don't even know it. Never before in the history of, like, say, modern business, if I go back kind of 80 or 90 years, never before has the pace of businesses getting disrupted by many of the entrepreneurs who are in this room been greater than today. That's a great thing. I'm perfectly comfortable if big companies go under. I don't want to see people lose their jobs because of bad decisions of senior executives. It has happened, it is happening, it's going to continue to happen. And the antidote for that is people who are putting values into what they do, not aside from it. So I'm a big believer in really focusing on the do, and then the say stuff kind of sorts itself out a bit. So that was my Stuart Varney story. I was thinking about, like, how would I open up something that was really embarrassing. So I got a question for folks here. How many people here, by show of hands, are inspired by being here this weekend with these speakers and so many local folks? How many people are inspired? Okay, that's pretty high. Now, I'm not surprised by this. This is not a trick question. Now, by a show of hands to yourself, right? Because I don't want you to raise your hands. I want you to raise your hand to yourself. If you've recently, or maybe even this weekend, taken a decision to do something a lot bigger, you are constructively dissatisfied with your status quo. You want to do something that's maybe really disruptive, really big. So I want you to think for a second, and that's why I don't want you to put your hands up, because it doesn't matter what the other people think. What matters is if you believe you're going to do something bigger. So if you feel that, like, shit, this is the moment, I'm going to do that thing. I'm going to make that change. I'm going to take all the things that I've been learning recently, and maybe this weekend as a catalyst to take a big leap. If you're feeling that way, or you've actually taken that decision, I want you to raise your hand to yourself right now. All right. Now that I've said that, how many people, by show of hand, are feeling nervous about something? You've got some anxiety about the future. Okay, this is awesome. Listen, I've got some news for you. And I didn't know this at first. I used to kind of like spend most of my early days oh, that's uncomfortable. I'm just going to move away from that. If you're feeling nervous, if you're feeling agitated, if you're feeling a little scared about your own goals, I've got news for you. Get excited. All big things that we do as people and as teams are preceded by nervous feelings. Sometimes feelings of strong dissatisfaction with the status quo. I'll admit it. You know, when you look at some of the data that Jonathan shared, there's a lot of good reasons to feel dissatisfied with that. And to feel agita or angst or anxiety. There ain't a good thing that I've ever done in my life where I could point back and say, I think that was pretty good, that wasn't preceded with a lot of knots in my stomach. You know, feeling, oh, God, can I do this? Do I really have what it takes? Am I smart enough? Am I good enough? How am I going to do this? What happens? And so I've been training myself, and I'm not saying I'm there yet, but training myself that when I feel those feelings, hey, Matthew, get excited, because there's probably some good stuff right ahead. And is it a little bit of a ninja move on my brain? Maybe, but if I can short wire my emotions, that's okay too. I'm totally fine with that. We all know, and I'm not going to, nobody's really talking about how complex the world is. All the speakers and all the folks that have come up here and been actually the connective tissue between the speakers, we all know how challenging things are. Things were really challenging, and I observed lots of business executives under incredible duress before the pandemic. So if you think about the growth of artificial intelligence, you think about e-commerce, you think about digital media and digital communications, EDI with your suppliers, all these things. Before the pandemic, what I was seeing among my other executives, people senior to me, people peer to me, whatever it might be, was really feelings of fear. Because that old adage, what got me here is not going to get me there, was becoming more intense for lots of people. I don't care whether you had 10 or 20 or 30 years of experience. In fact, sometimes the more experience you had, the more agita I was seeing among some senior executives because they were feeling outdated. And then there was like, oh, fake it till you make it, and all this other stuff. And then the pandemic hit, and all hell breaks loose in all ways for humans, for communities, and for all the businesses that they choose to be part of or other organizations they choose to be part of. And, the pace of change is unfortunately, I think, framed as something to be scared of and something bad. And I think consultants are particularly good, particularly big business consultants, at making businesses feel scared about the pace of change. Like, oh, change, that's bad. Well, yeah. Change is like awesome. Change, it's when things are bolted to the ground that we should feel frustrated. When change is happening, it creates huge opportunity. No great things happen when there isn't change and disruption happening. And the other thing is that I spent a bunch of my career early on we used to talk about gurus, like gurus of digital media, or digital, gurus of social media. And one of the beautiful things about the pace of change is that it's two things. One, it's probably not going to slow down. I think we all kind of agree that change is not going to all of a sudden slow down. But more importantly, change is an incredible democratizing force. Just because you were the expert yesterday actually has very little bearing on whether you're not the expert today. And so that causes a lot of panic for senior people, and that's too bad for them. Honestly, they're going to have to redefine, their value proposition to their own organizations. But the pace of change, I believe, is an incredible democratizing force because it allows everybody in the organization, yourself, your teammates, everybody in your organization, whether it's a business or not. I'm going to use the word business a lot, but I mean organization. No matter how long you've been there, or what your expertise is, you now have an opportunity to shape what gets done now, decisions that get taken now, and where that organization has an impact today and tomorrow more than ever before. That's the benefit of the democratization that the speed of change creates. The other thing that requires is that it really forces people with positional authority to either radically redistribute that authority and agency to the people on the front line in the organization, the people actually doing the work. Or bankrupt the company. I mean, if you think about the pace of CEOs getting fired, CMOs turning, any C-suite, any senior person, I've never seen it. It's never been as fast as it is now. Board members, and everybody's like, I don't know. And I always joke with my team, the higher you go, the less you know, and that becomes truer every day. Because of the pace of change. And I say that not to belittle myself, because there are things that in my prior job as the CEO, there are things that only I can do, the stuff that only I can sign, bills that maybe only I could sign, or big decisions like, oh, we're trying to debate this, and Matthew's got to take a decision. But I really want those to be few and far between. Because if they're going through me, that's a problem. Too slow, I'm very far away from the front line of the organization, and again, the higher you go, the less you know. And so I'm on a journey of redefining and re-articulating what value do I even offer to the organization. And I think this is true of all founders and all C-suite executives. I don't care if you've got one employee yourself or you've got 10,000 employees. You know, Ben & Jerry's, we grew Ben & Jerry's to over $1 billion in sales. We're in over 30 countries, several hundred employees, and thousands of people that work in our scoop shops around the world. And I would often joke with people that, you know, as the CEO, I just may be the most dangerous person in the company because I'm the furthest away from actually the stuff that matters most. I'm not saying I ate ice cream every day. Right? We were often tasting ice creams and looking at innovations. But my job is not to do the R&D team's job. My job is not to do the culinary team's job. My job is not to do the brilliant marketers' jobs. And my job is not to do the social mission team's job on our climate and our social justice initiatives. So stepping back and actually finding, I'm not saying I did a good job at it, by the way. Please don't, I don't want that to be subtext here. But this idea of senior executives, whether they're one of one or they're one of many, really have to redefine how they are radically redistributing power away from themselves and probably redefining their role more as a sage or a guide, a shepherd. And the other thing I would say to my team often is, I'm not the future, you are. It's just the way it is, especially for CEOs. Now, I suppose you could stay as CEO forever, but that's probably not necessarily the best thing for everybody else and giving other folks the opportunity. Everything about leadership requires courage, right? And I think courage there's a lot of mythology, barring Craig. I'm super inspired by Craig's work on mythology and lorology. I spent a lot of I'm a student of courage, organizational courage for people and organizations. And the reason I'm a student is because for a lot of my career, I didn't have enough of it. I watched people make decisions and take decisions because they were louder than me. They had their hand up in class faster than me. And they just seemed to demonstrate more confidence than I did. And I was like, oh, wow, that person's they seem really confident. They got a lot of courage in that. And then, we'd finally find out it was a stupid idea. It was a total stupid-ass idea. And I'd be like, Matthew, you should have put your hand up. You should have spoke up in that moment. And so, after many years of that, I started to kind of say, dude, you only have yourself to blame here. So not like in a shame way, but like come on, And so I think there's a lot of mythology around courage. So when we think about courage, this is going to be a free word association. I'd love people to just shout out some words. There's no right or wrong answer. This is totally group work on this. I'm not going to no, you're wrong. So courage, what does it mean to you? No, really think about your own experience and forget everybody else in the room. Courage to you, what are some word associations? Confidence? I'm sorry? Fearless? Bravery, intestinal fortitude? Excuses? Thick skin, I'm sorry? Risk. Okay, what else? Action. What else? Fear. Strength. Did I hear humility? I'm sorry? Yeah, okay. This is great. Listen, I will always be a student of courage because if you want to do big things, you're going to be afraid. It's just kind of simple, and I do know that people who that say that fearlessness is really dangerous. It kind of goes a little bit to this idea of the hero. Someone who's truly fearless can often be very dangerous. Right? And particularly if you're trying to build and develop a people-centered organization where you're really bringing together your purpose, your head, your heart, your flourishing, your focus on yes. The bigger it is, the more afraid you're going to be, and that's totally normal. And courage for me, I used to think courage was just be tough enough I could do this thing, right? Or I could maybe just act tough enough, and I don't think that was it. That was it either. I think courage often is common sense. We talk about things that were courageous, usually in the past tense. That person, that business, that was courageous what they did. When I go talk to people that I feel did courageous stuff, I say, holy shit, how'd you do that? That's with all those headwinds against your team or your business or, the anti-woke movement, whatever it might be, how did you do that? And usually people say, and back me up on this one, if you feel, you say, it's well, it was the right thing to do. And then later we'll kind of talk about it as courageous. I don't know. people, I think we just need to be courageous here. And then I go out and, Stuart Varney, we're courageous. That's not the way it is. So often courage is common sense in the moment where you are clear, you've got clarity about your values, you've got clarity about your purpose and the shared purpose of the people that you've chosen to jam with, and you choose to do some stuff that makes you really nervous, but you know is going to be important, right? And the courage to do that often simply comes from the clarity that you've got about what it is you want to do and why you want to do it. I know that sounds really, really basic, but I think we make courage inaccessible to ourselves, and that's unnecessary. And so I believe that courage is often, it's kind of common sense. Even if it's hard, even if you fail a lot, I'm not saying it's like pleasant all the time, but moving towards things that you want to do, as long as they're consistent with your values, you have clarity about your values, you have clarity about your purpose, actually you can take a lot of punches. But if you're not clear and someone kind of comes at you and you may not be able to you may not have the resilience. And so I think a lot of courage is common sense that flows from the clarity of your values and kind of why you're jamming with a certain group of people. I use the term commonplace also because I often in my head I would make things that I felt I needed to do out of my own reach by my own internal language. Like, heroism or fearlessness or whatnot. And the reality is, courage it's kind of like a human right. Like we all have the capacity for courage. We all do. And it's kind of funny how, I'll speak personally, how I would move the bar away on doing courageous stuff because it was like, I'm not sure if I can do that. I'm a crier, by the way, so bear with me. You're probably, what's wrong with this guy? His voice is cracking. But why I had these conversations. I said, why am I moving the bar away in terms of making things accessible when they are consistent with my values? I know that for me, I like to grow businesses. I like to beat the competition, and I like to actually use the business to do good things. Right? I'm learning a lot more about those things now. I'm not a lifelong person that's been engaged in social and climate justice, but over the past decade, I'm learning a lot. Why would I move that bar further out when, in fact, courage, doing difficult things that I know are consistent, should be a daily practice? And the number one barrier we all know is here, right? It's here, sometimes here, like, I'm freaking out, whatever it might be. So I would encourage you to think about, when have you been at your most courageous and why? Very simple exercise. Grab a coffee or tea or a cider or whatnot, or Haagen-Dazs ice cream, and sit down and think of it. I'm serious. And think about it and say, when was I at my most courageous? But don't just say most. Look, you got to have more than one, and you all have hundreds and hundreds of them. When was I on the most courageous side of stuff? And how did that happen? What barrier did I overcome? What obstacles did I overcome? And this is a super simple thing. This is really, really simple. And I encourage you to make this part of your daily practice so that you remind yourself that you're actually super courageous right now. And I'm not saying to pump you up, I'm just saying it is a fact. And you also, I think, can benefit, and maybe some of you already do this, so I don't mean to be presumptive, but I find that I can benefit by making it part of my daily self-talk, my daily mantras, to talk about what courageous looks like. Not so that I can pat myself on the back or puff up my ego. And that's a really important point. That's not the point here. It's knowing that I want to do some things that are difficult. I've got some approach avoidance. I'm feeling some fear. I'm not sure how to handle this with my family, my significant other, my staff. Courage, making it commonplace is incredibly important. And the other thing I'd say about that is we talk about the courage of leaders, and almost like that leaders are the ones that have to have all the courage, or they have to have almost like a little bit of a monopoly on courage, that the CEO or a C-suite executive, they're the ones that need to take the tough calls, the tough decisions. I can't tell you how many times in my career I've seen tough in quotes, masquerading as smart. We're just going to be bold. Dumb. And I didn't, for most of my career, I didn't have the courage to say to people, listen, don't try to don't dress up this bad idea as we just need to take a tough call here. We just got to be tough here and do the tough thing. And it came up earlier, that Nick mentioned this, the easy wrong versus the difficult right. And so we talk about that in ourselves, and certainly if we are founders, if we are senior executives, if we're running our own organizations, we do have to have a daily practice, I believe, or maybe other day, where you're investigating what kind of courage you're bringing personally to your life, to do those things, to live your values. We're trying to live up to our values. That's one of the golden cables of this conversation, I think, is values, and then how do you live up to them? Purpose, and how do you have the intestinal fortitude to go actually do that when there's a lot of headwinds. But there's another thing that I think, that I have a hypothesis that I want to share with you that I think is more important than your courage, is that how do you democratize courage within your organization? And I think you see where I'm going. Your courage is important, and modeling courage is one of the most important things that we as leaders can do. Again, whether you work with one person or you got 10,000 people on your staff, modeling courage is important. But far, far more important is democratizing courage within your organization. And I'll say a little bit more about this, but I think it's pretty self-explanatory. I will tell you this: if you're in a business and your competitor is doing a better job at democratizing courage in their organization than you, they're going to beat you. Conversely, if you're able to democratize courage and make it more commonplace for the people in your teams, particularly people that don't actually look like they've got a lot of courage, or maybe they're more junior, or maybe you see that their self-esteem, they don't talk first in the meeting. Maybe their voice isn't being heard in your meetings, right? So I think this is an important and under-discussed thing, particularly when we talk about, there's just this like romanticizing about the founders and C-suite folks, and that's fine. That's fine, but I'm becoming less relevant every day. It doesn't actually matter what my positional authority is. Again, I ran a very large company with lots of employees and #1 packaged ice cream in the United States. But the reality is, all of my 30 years of business, the funny thing about experience is that 100% of it is in yesterday, right? No matter what I want to say, 100% of my experience is yesterday. So this idea of democratizing courage is all about creating these circumstances, the environment, a very rich and fertile environment, really employing the things that all the speakers and all the local leaders who have talked about here, particularly around the human-centered nature of the imperative for driving change. What does democratizing courage in your organization look like? Is a question you want to ask yourself. How will I know if I'm democratizing courage? Everybody has, I think, the human right to tap into their courage, right? It's not on the list of human rights, but certainly from a leadership perspective, it's our job to support people. But how do you know what it looks like? Is a question I would suggest that you ask yourself. How will I know I'm doing it? Because we talk about like inclusion, and DEI is already come under incredible fire most recently. It's really the anti-woke movement is really disgusting in lots of ways, and maybe that's for another talk. But the headwinds aren't going away because actually we are making progress. We need to make more of it, and the forces that don't want things to change are just going to continue to fight harder. So that's why you need everybody on your team jazzed up and tapping into their own courage. There's no pump-up speech that you can give people that's going to last much longer than that pump-up speech. You can jazz people up with a current crisis or an opportunity, but that's kind of foxhole mentality, actually. And we need foxhole mentality sometimes. Sometimes we are in crises. We need to be more directive. We need to take control. We need to exercise our leadership control in organizations to deal with crises. But most things are not that way. And if you can find a way to democratize courage within your organization, you really will unlock a lot of the eye of inclusion. Are people feeling heard? Are their voices being part of the discussion? And I need to work more with some experts to take this idea of kind of organizational courage and connect it with inclusion. Because we all know, I shouldn't say it that way, for folks that work in racial equity and DEI, that representation is a symptom. Representation for different peoples and different voices by itself does very little. The goal is not representation. Let's have diversity as a representation. The power of diversity is when people are actually taking action. I heard action said a couple of times when it relates to courage. So, so I'll pause there for a second. I'm going to shift to another. What are we doing on time here, anyways? So give me a time check, because I'd like to do a little cute. Huh? What's that? 3:43. When do you want to wrap up?
Like 5 minutes.
Okay. So, and we can do. Are we getting together outside or something like that?
Yeah.
All right. So we'll do Q&A kind of. We'll do Q&A here. Okay, cool. Groovy. So one of the couple of the thoughts that I wanted to touch on briefly is, and it's come up a number of times from a lot of smart and talented people who've been speaking around the power of trust. Trust is, man, oh man, I've done so many stupid things that hurt trust when I think back. Trust is absolutely the lifeblood of courage. You could argue that trust is lots of things, but on this topic of courage, I don't care how many consultants I don't know how many books you read, I don't care what, if you're not actually building trust, forget about courage. Not rocket science, is it? But trust, and trust means it's a big fat word, I acknowledge that. But if people don't trust you, they won't help you. And if they don't help you, you're not going to change the world or change these 3 counties, change this valley. If people don't trust you, they won't want to tap into their courage for you or their coworkers. And so this idea of that as leaders, we are by definition in the trust business, whether we know it or accept it or not. And so that's an additional question I would respectfully ask people to think about. I ask myself all the time, what does trust look like? How can I get help creating more trust in my organization? Do people trust me? Do they trust each other? People will not take big leaps if they don't feel that they have each other's backs. Again, not rocket science, but pretty scarce in organizations, particularly with the pressures that people are under. You put people under pressure, you put organizations under pressure, we all go back to our easier toolboxes. This is kind of psychology 101, but really what we need is to leap forward. And so when I think about that kind of, use that analogy of the golden cable of kind of courage for yourself, democratizing courage, and the nature of trust and how important that is, really I would say that these are your most important KPIs. Sales, profit, enrollment, market share. I argue that those KPIs are symptoms. They're important symptoms because very often that's what we're measuring or that's what the financial folks like. But I would argue, my experience is that sales, profit, market share, affinity with your consumers, household penetration, social followers are symptoms of a team that has courage at the top, democratized courage across the organization, and trust as the number one. Those are progenitors of all great outcomes. And I'm a big believer also in the forensics of success and the forensics of failure. We are today upstream from all of tomorrow's successes and failures, and we have that incredible opportunity to drive that change. The last thing I'd say, and we can maybe wrap up and do a little Q&A, is that I see myself as kind of like running around with cans of gasoline looking for sparks. I know maybe not a great analogy, so I'm sorry. It's a petrochemical analogy, and it's not an ode to the industry in the area. But I find that a lot of my job, particularly the further I've gone in organizations and a lot of privileged opportunities that I've had, is I feel like I'm running around looking for sparks, and I want to like get down on my knees and start fanning them. Like, right? It's like that little, ball of stuff, and you're like, and then I come over and I want to fan them and whatnot. And so I would just, and And just want to say a big thank you to Sandy and the team for letting me be part of all this. And I'd love to actually do a little Q&A. You want to wrap up a little Q&A? All right, any questions? Anything I say, you're like, that's total bullshit. I don't agree with that at all. Hi.
Oh, geez.
Yes, speak to the box.
What's one way that you implemented democratization at Ben & Jerry's? What's an example?
Yeah, okay. One of the biggest focuses for our business, particularly in Europe for Ben & Jerry's, was immigration, the rights for immigration and asylum seekers. And there's a number of countries in Europe, you've seen it in the news maybe, it's horrendous what is done to immigrants. Literally anti-human rights, people dying in boats, and people being put in detention centers. Period. And I'll be happy to argue with anybody if they feel like the way that countries treat immigrants is a good thing. I know very little about the topic. So right out of the gate, when the team came to me with some pretty heavy-duty things that they wanted to do. I think also the team felt that I was up for a bunch of stuff. It's like, oh, let's take this into Matthew. But my job was not to approve those things, but was actually to instigate. So for me, when the team came in, when they said to me, we want to do this, here's the situation, we want to put this post out, we want to do this campaign, and we want to go directly at major politicians in the UK. I was like, whoa. So, And by the way, my parent company's headquarters, Unilever, its headquarters is in London. So, but I had to hide some of that reaction, honestly. I say hide it, I think hide's not a good way, but I kind of basically set that aside for a moment. And so, because the last thing they should hear is, hey, we're all jazzed up about this thing. This is total bullshit what they're doing, let's say in a country like the UK in terms of its policies specifically, and really regressive anti-humanitarian policies. The last thing I want them to see on my face is, ooh. Like, talk about like CEO screwing the whole thing up, right? Like, let me hear cold water, let me grab another bucket. So the first thing is actually managing myself. I'm not saying I do a good job of it. I'm not saying I did a good job. But managing myself, knowing that we were up for big stuff, and I had put the call to action. Let's double down, let's triple down on these things that Ben & Jerry stands for, because the forces are really going the other way, for crying out loud, on some of these social justice and climate justice issues. So that was the first thing, is I got to manage myself, all right? And I got to think about that. How do I manage myself? Because positional authority is real, and I don't want to screw that up, right? And I screw it up a lot. The second thing was to provoke, as I said, I alluded to a moment ago. And I would ask the team questions. And when I first started with Ben & Jerry's, one of the social mission folks was like, they wanted to call President Trump on one of our packages of ice cream. And I was like, oh, whoa. And I was in the job like 90 days. I was like, oh, can we just say, but I didn't say that. And he said to me, when I was asking questions, I was saying, well, what's your goal? Why do you could do this campaign with or without naming the Trump administration. Why do you want to do that? And he said, well, Matthew, if you're not behind this and you're not up for it, I said, stop right there. Don't misinterpret me asking questions and me trying to understand what you're trying to do and make it better as code for I'm going to give you the runaround. Now, it was challenging him. He obviously had that experience with leaders in the past. And so I wasn't trying to chastise him, because clearly he's, Matthew's going to ask us 15 questions. And at the end of the day, in a week, he's going to say no. And people are afraid of that, particularly the most courageous people in the organization. They are afraid that the senior people are going to be, yeah, too expensive. Yeah, maybe later. Can you do this analysis 10 more times? Bullshit. Like they're going to have a vote on this thing in like a week and a half. And so that was usually my first question. Do we have to do this right now? No. So managing myself and being really clear about why I'm asking and provocative questions in order to make the program as strong as it can be. And often they had the expertise there. A lot of the questions I was asking was about damage control, risk management. Because I got 30 years of business experience. I've failed a lot. I've screwed a lot of things up, way more than my staff has. That's an area that I can bring value in. I've screwed a lot of stuff up. I've seen other teams screw stuff up. So how do I use my powers of inquiry and curiosity that we're talked about a lot over the past couple of days to help the team? But be really clear with them, why am I asking this question? I'm not asking you this because I'm hoping that if I ask you enough questions, you'll go away and you won't do this really kind of scary program that's going to cause a lot of PR. No, I'm doing it because of this, this, and this. And even when there were times when I knew that I was going to get called out, I'm fine with that. That's part of my job, for crying out loud. That's why I need your help, staff. Please educate me. And when they ask me this, what do I say? Not, when they ask me this, what am I supposed to say? No, let's actually work through it. Let's work through that. Thank you for that question.
Yeah, one more.
Lucky person.
The lawn.
Thank you.
You mentioned daily courage and giving yourself little pep talks about courage. Can you give us some examples of what you might have said or how you might have done that?
Yes. I wouldn't call them, thank you for the question, I wouldn't call them pep talks. I used to give myself pep talks, but the pep didn't last very long. Like, I'm like, oh, pep up. And then like this huge crappy thing would like, and I'm like, I can't pep myself up to deal with this frickin' problem. So I'm not to pick on that term, but I'm glad you asked it that way, because this isn't about, for me, this isn't about psyching yourself up or like, yeah. I do like to look in the mirror and go, yeah, there are times for that, right? Power moves and yeah. But one of the things that I had to do that I really had to, that was a daily thing for me, is when we took the positions on Ben & Jerry's around Black Lives Matter. So, sorry. So when George Floyd was killed, we got together as a team, and we knew we needed to do something. Right, just as Ben & Jerry's, we basically came together and said, hold on, these are just the latest, most public versions of inhumane treatment to lots of people of color. These just happen to be public. It's not just George Floyd, it's not just Breonna Taylor, but a whole series of things that we've been tracking and working on. And so once we had decided there's the positions that we wanted to take around white supremacy culture, really moving kind of beyond some of the language and really through the work with some of our partners, Advancement Project National Office, Race Forward, Movement for Black Lives. They weren't hollow positions, they were actually pretty meaty based on the expertise of our partners in the markets and that's been the business model. But what happened is this was going on is that there was a lot of support, not only in the United States, but around the world and in the markets that we operate, for something has got to change after George Floyd was murdered. But then the anti-woke movement got a hold of this and has since been pushing back on those things. So when we would use language around defund the police, when we would use language around Black Lives Matter, when we would talk about front-end criminal justice reform as part of our social mission work, again, with our grassroots partners, I would get lots of questions from people outside the company and from the parent company. What's this about? Particularly as we were owned by a European company. And they're like, what the hell's going on over there in America? And should you even be talking about this stuff? Again, not that Unilever wasn't supportive. Our parent company is incredibly supportive of Ben & Jerry's. And Ben & Jerry's has thrived actually under Unilever. That's not just me saying it to hero Unilever, but the company has actually done extremely well. And when Unilever bought the company in 2000, they knew exactly what they were buying. That doesn't stop the fact that the anti-woke movement is putting incredible pressure through media, the business press, investors. Why are you using this inflammatory language? Well, first of all, you may find it inflammatory, but that's the language of the people in the movement. So, and this had gone on for a long time, because every time we wanted to put out a new piece, a blog or explaining, when we say defund the police, what are we actually talking about? This isn't, an anti-police thing. What are we really talking about here? I had to learn about it, and I'm not an expert in these topics. And I had to be a translator to people who were far less knowledgeable than me in different, let's say stakeholders. And that actually was pretty grueling, to be honest with you. So I had to find every day, usually every day, every week, ways to, and a pep talk would have never gotten me up to that. So I had to become at least proficient enough in the issue, and then find out ways to talk to stakeholders, not just to say, get the hell out of here, we're doing it because we're Ben & Jerry's. That's not really helpful? How can I be the educator of other people and the translator for other people when I myself am not the expert? This is one of the things that happens because none of us can be experts in everything. And to have those conversations, I had to prepare for those conversations and really model through how I wanted those conversations to go. And often I would use role playing with my staff, the people with the experts, because they weren't going to be in the room. These were usually confidential conversations that related to public relations and statements, and lots of people backlashing. And you see it every day now. Bud Light, the biggest brand in the United States. Disney! That's just not going to stop. And I don't say that with negative. I say it with almost like a smirk, right? The anti-woke movement is really afraid about the change that we've made and the changes that we're about to make. And things aren't going to get easier. There isn't anything that isn't political anymore. Everything is political to somebody. And so when people would say to us, and I'll wrap up on this, when someone, the funniest thing is people like, I'd go on Twitter and people like, why don't you just stick to making ice cream? It's the stupidest thing, right? I'm not buying any more Ben & Jerry's. And we always joke like, these people, whoever's wrote that never bought Ben & Jerry's anyways. Boycott Ben & Jerry's. And we'd have a good laugh about it because there's a saying in my former employer's office, we would say, nothing drives sales like a good boycott. Thank you very much. I'm going to wrap up on that one. Thank you. Thank you.